Hey, my name is Matt Storr, and I repair saxophones for a living, and we are overhauling a saxophone together. So this is part 2. We are just getting started with the saxophone, and so this is a Pire Super Artiste. This looks like it has original pads, and I've briefly, I think I did like a play condition on a horn like this like a long time ago, or maybe it was just even shown to me. So I haven't actually worked on this particular brand of saxophone before. What I know is that it's handmade in France, undervalued, and they typically play pretty great. And I've kind of been wanting one of these for a long time. So I finally picked one up for myself, and I'm excited to get it working again. But we're going to figure out what's going on with it, and we're going to give it a full overhaul. And what we're going to do is, there's basically, striving for perfection. Is like a log curve, right? The closer you get to it, and this is the same thing I think with playing music, right? The closer you get to it, the more work you've put in. And we're going to try and find somewhere, past decent, maybe past good, approaching excellent, where we're spending a reasonable amount of time on this horn, and we're doing things right, and we're doing things well, and it should end up where I can own and play this saxophone and, have no issues with it. But therefore, the things that we're going to see me doing here are not aimed towards absolute perfection. It's aimed towards actually like getting the horn overhauled and doing it really well. Typically with my clients, I offer them, basic like 2 different levels of my service. One is pretty darn good, and one is spare no expense. And we're going to be doing pretty darn good on this saxophone. Maybe a few things where we're going to spare no expense or do something stupid that I typically wouldn't do just because I own it. So therefore, I also get to customize it a little bit to my desires. So when I first get a saxophone in for overhaul, the first thing I do is inspect it, especially a horn like this where I'm not very familiar with it, and try and find whatever weird things are going on with it, and try and sort of get an idea of what the horn looks like. I mean, that's something interesting, right? Like this looks like this was flared out. Doesn't look like it has a ring around it. So that's something we're going to have to be careful with. And I think something we're lucky that this has not been damaged. This is the micro tuner, or it's not really, it's like more like a tuning stop. And we can see that it's been damaged. I might just take this off. This is something interesting here. We can see the edge of this has been like chamfered over on the inside and the outside. So if we're doing a neck fit later, we're going to want to be aware of the fact that this has actually been thinned on the end here. And we can sort of see like rub marks here where the plating's gone, but not all the way around. So yeah, this is going to need a neck fit, almost definitely. I mean, they almost always do. Octave mechanism is unique. How's that work? Okay, so this is sprung on its own. 2 springs here. 1, 2, 3, 4 springs in the octave mechanism. 5 if you count the neck. Although the way this is put together, it doesn't need the neck to operate correctly. Selmer style octave mechanism needs the neck to provide the force here. But it looks like we are providing that ourselves by lifting this up on the G and forcing that down against this spring with that spring. So that's pretty interesting. Looks like we've got a crush here. Be a lot easier to see how bad that is once we take it apart. But I mean, my fingers right here are like actually touching. So probably bad enough. It's probably like at least a 1/4 inch where it's not supposed to be. Same thing here, or like the B flat, but it's hard to know. I don't know this horn exactly. Like I don't have another one to compare it to. So what we're going to have to do is use sort of like, get that dent pushed out and see if we can figure out where everything was supposed to be and make sure we're in the right spot. Sometimes you can use like, the C sharp here is based on this side of the body tube. So if this side moves, sometimes you can tell here, but that's so close to the bottom of the bow Sometimes if the B and the B flat are located here, you can look and see where they've moved to, but the B and the B flat are mounted on the bell, so they would have moved with it. So unfortunately, it's not something we can do. Looks like these rollers, some of them are stuck. Keys are all moving pretty well, which is really, really good. And this looks like original setup, so I'm going to take note of the key heights here, see where they are about. And at least that's where the factory thought it was good to put them. And I can see on the back here that there's really not too much adjustment material here. I'm going to want a little bit more room, I think, to make sure that it's nice and silent. That's probably enough, but I kind of like to have, especially on a bar like this, I like to have a leather wrap and then a piece of adjustment material and a piece of adjustment material on the bottom of each key foot and a little bit on the body. It's probably overkill, but so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to open this up a little bit, and it'll also start giving me a feel for, like, because I don't know exactly how tough the metal is on this horn, so we'll see how this works. Okay, not bad. It slowed it down, probably got it binding a little bit, so I'm going to hold the bar, push it back just a little bit, see if that helps with the binding. Yeah. Sometimes keys will bind when you open them up. Let's see. Alright, I'm going to get a little piece of cardboard to spread out that force, because these keys feel pretty strong and I don't want to like dent the body tube. So put that underneath there so I can bend the F up just a little bit. Okay, and then we'll do that for the E. And again, I'm doing this just to give myself more room later on. Try and make these so they're similar. Looks like this one can go up just a little bit more. I have a video on this, I think, called like inherent key adjustments. And it's always easier to do these before you disassemble the horn. Metal has a memory and it'll like go back to where it was a little bit, back towards where it was a little bit. And doing this now allows it time to find where it's going to be, and also, you know, if you do your pad work first and then you try and bend a key and you get like a little bit of binding or something, you've got to take it apart to fix that. And some of the bending I just did introduced like a little bit of binding in there, but that'll come out as a matter of course while we do the pad work later. And disassembly and cleaning and everything. I'm fairly happy with the upper stack. I think I might bend the C sharp up just a tiny bit, but it's interesting. I'm going to leave that for now because I don't know exactly how those interact. Like, is that round on the bottom? Like, is it supposed to be? It's a strange relationship between those keys there. Probably look a little bit normal later. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is take some penetrating oil. I don't think everything's going to come apart, but this will vastly increase the chances. A lot of times on a vintage horn, especially if it's not moving really easily, I will actually put this stuff on days or weeks ahead of time. Sometimes, you know, if it's really bound up, I'll do it weeks ahead of time, several times, just kind of keep adding penetrating oil. There's lots of different penetrating oils. Different people swear by different ones. I have used, what's this stuff called? That'll come to me. Not because like I know it's the best or anything, but just kind of I know how it acts and it's worked, so I keep using it. PB Blaster, that's right. Kind of stinks though. Like the actual smell of it is not great. But it is really, really thin. It does seem to wick in there pretty well. A little scared of these rollers. Don't know exactly what's going on with them. Okay, so I'm going to start disassembling this. I wonder if if that's original or whether someone just made it. Looks like it's got some of the clarinet style roughing of the wood to allow a piece of cork to go there. Maybe we'll do that later. All right, so bring myself out my small parts tin. Start taking off some of the small parts that I know are going to go in there just to get them out of the way. Now, the way we take apart a saxophone is mostly determined by, what gets in the way. And I haven't done one of these before, so I'll sort of be guessing as I go. But typically you're going to be starting with bell keys, C, E flat, chromatic F sharp, octave key, palm keys, and get down to the stacks last. If you need to do a play condition, that's something interesting to note. Look at that. So these posts are pretty close together up here, and they're a little farther apart down here. So there's actually like an arc between, or an angle between them. That looks purposeful. I actually had a customer one time. So this happens, you've got a similar thing going on the back end of Buffet Super Dynaction. And I overhauled a horn for a customer once, and he saw that, and it's like one of the few times I've had like an unpleasant customer reaction was he was taking pictures down the body tube, and the posts were apart, so it looked like this, right? And it just didn't look right. It made the body look like it was bending, and this might have a body bend in it too, but there's definitely a much larger distance between the posts down here than there is up here, he was definitely not happy that I had left a body bend in the horn, and could not be convinced otherwise. So stuff like that is kind of important to notice if you do when you get started. Now, this post might be knocked over this way a little bit, but this looks like it's pretty much centered over that pad. The pad cup looks like it's centered over the tone hole. So we'll have to get closer in there and see. It certainly isn't going to be as open as this is, because they're actually, you can just look at it over top. They're almost lined up. But that might move a little bit because this does look bent, right? So we'll have to see if that's because of a body bend or whether this just needs to go over just a little bit or what. All right, so get your screwdrivers out. I am going to start with, how about the low C and E flat? And it makes your job a lot easier if you take the springs off first. They're going to apply tension, right? And as soon as you screw this out and the threads clear this post, it'll bind up by getting pushed that way. Hey, it's moving really easily. That's fantastic. That click click is where the threads are clearing the post itself. I'm going to put a paper towel here to lay my rods down upon, I suppose. Pretty dirty, but not crazy. That roller is not moving. So that's going to be a stuck roller that we'll have to deal with. This one seems like it might come out. Yep. Lucky, lucky. Put those in my small parts. Take a look at the pad. That impression is pretty far out there, right? So that's good that that's nice and centered over that tone hole. We're gonna have to make sure, looks like a lot of them are like that, where the tone holes are almost as big as the key cups. So we're gonna have to make sure that our pads are really snug in here so that we've actually got the ability to, seat really close to the edge like that. We're gonna have to make sure everything is lined up. Information like this, is just stuff that you really need to inspect the horn as you take it apart, because you're going to learn an awful lot about what's going on. You can learn it, when you're putting it back together, just by principle, but it's a little bit easier on this side of things. And this is one of the reasons, I kind of have trouble with, apprentices, right? Or having, the idea of an apprentice. Well, there's not a lot of work that, I don't learn a ton from. Okay, that's going to have to wait. I feel like the end result is best if I do almost everything myself. The one thing that feels like I can get away with not doing is cleaning. But, it's not particularly invigorating to do over and over and over, and I really only need it once a week. So that's about the pace that I do overhauls. Usually slower, probably, actually, if I'm being honest. All right, let's see. Let's get a bigger screwdriver in here. Doesn't seem like it wants to move. There we go. All right, it looks like these are fairly long, but they look like they're shaped in such a way that most keys I'll only need to take one of the pivot screws off to get it all the way off. And I'm going to put them right back where they came from, because I can even tell just by looking, like these are slightly different from one another. They've kind of worn into place, so I want them all to go back exactly where they came from. So I'm going to leave them in place for now. We will be taking it further apart when we want to clean. Okay, let's go ahead and get this top stack out of the way. Get the springs off. A spring hook like this is a really valuable tool, really easy. You can make them from, is that actually going to come out? Yeah, it is. You can make them from crochet hooks, or you can buy them already made. Oh, that's pretty deep in there. Looks like it's like halfway inside that post, so we might be making a new rod for that one. Not absolutely necessary, but better to have a rod that fills up the whole post, gives it a bit more structural integrity. And that came out real easy, especially for how dirty it is. Alright, so there's our G key. It's also good to take note of like how thick the adjustment materials are. The more you can sort of like duplicate, especially like in this case, this horn is geometrically like pretty close to where it's supposed to be. If someone were to put really thick pads in this, then they would have to bend the key cup, and maybe like, you know, if they put really thick materials here, they might have to bend this too. You can get to the point where you're pretty far from what was intended if you don't use correct thickness materials. So it's really nice that we're getting to take a look at what was original on this horn and get an idea of how everything's supposed to be. There's our bis. There's our B. It's an interesting shape there, huh? Our front F with a cutout for the spring to go through. Here is, some people call it the bar key or the C sharp. So it looks like this is, let's see. Yeah, just round, and they just put like a piece of cork on it that wrapped around it. I might do that differently. I might put a little leather wrap on the bar and then a piece of synthetic cork. Where to go? Here. Right there. But we'll have to see how that relationship holds up. Yeah, kind of weird, huh? Okay, let's go ahead and get this E out of the way. This one I'm holding in place so it doesn't like torque it because of that spring, because the spring's not really going to go all the way around the bottom, right? Push it out when I'm taking it out. So there's our E. Which, yeah, we were wondering if this post was in the right spot, right? But that is pretty much centered inside that key cup. I'll go ahead and get the palm keys out of here. Actually, let's take a look at that A. So there was what looks like felt here that got eaten away over time. That's pretty interesting, huh? That that arm looks like it's brazed to the bottom of here versus coming off the side that way. That's interesting. Okay. Front F rocker. That one really doesn't want to come. There we go. Having screwdrivers that are high quality and fit your slots really well is super important, especially on older instruments. Oh, look at that, it's like really thin through there. So I would want to be careful, and if I was trying to bend this at all, it doesn't look like it really needs it, But like, you know, if I wanted this to be higher, right, and like bend this up, I'd have to support it here, because if I was just like pulling on it, this is going to bend before this does. So noting stuff like that can be helpful. Yeah, having screwdrivers that fit your slots really well and don't bend. A lot of like jeweler's screwdrivers are not really built for the kind of torque you can apply when you're disassembling a saxophone, especially an old one that hasn't been apart in, oh boy, I think the serial numbers for these horns are not like as precise as some others, but I think this is from like the late 40s. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I did a bit of research on it before I got it, but that was quite a while ago. What serial number are we? Oh yeah, this is the one that has a serial number in a really weird spot. Took me forever to find it. And then, now I've forgotten. There it is. 14379. What a weird spot for a serial number, huh? I mean, that can come off. Wonder if it's anywhere on the body itself. Guess we'll find out as we go along. And I'm applying a fair amount of pressure, like with my palm here. It's one of the things I like, you know, the pommels on these things. Makes it a lot easier to turn it quickly and be applying a lot of pressure, but I'm applying quite a fair amount on a lot of these keys because they're pretty gummy. Nothing's stuck yet except for this one, so we will have to go through how to unstick. Even if everything else goes well, we will have to do a stuck roller. Little spring on the bottom there. And another thing that was kind of important to note was when this was together, these keys were kind of stepped, right? They were not all in a straight line. One was each higher than the next. So we'll put it back together that way. Nice strong spring on the bottom of there. That screw looks good. Not a ton of it, not like super thick material because that's starting like pretty low compared to the rest. Okay. Now this octave mechanism, huh? What an interesting design. Lots of bits. Looks like it should be fairly foolproof. Famous last words. But once it's like sprung correctly and has adjustment materials on there the correct way, it looks like it should work really, really well. Oops. Forgot to do that spring. I don't know if it's going to come all the way out. Yeah, it won't. So I'll just kind of hold this in place. See, so like that's what I was talking about, where if you don't undo the springs, it torques it out of the way. Typically not enough to like actually bend the rod, but it will make it sticky, make it hard to come out. Okay, there's some of our octave mechanism bits. Bigger screw than I expected. And a flat spring, you sort of do the same thing. You hold it down so that it doesn't spring up out of the way, right? Okay. Now let's go ahead. I guess this will be the last piece on this side. Trying to watch out, like, you know, seeing how I put my hand. If there was a spring that was going this way that was bent that way and I slipped, I could get a spring really, really deep into my body, which is not something I would like to do. Happens quite often though, but if you can avoid it, that's better. Okay, so let's go ahead and get the C sharp off here. Looks like that is all by itself. and it won't be a problem. Okay, there's our C sharp. Okay, let's see if we can get, oh yes, excellent. Stuck rollers are such a huge pain because, you know, the rollers are made out of a much softer material than the metal of the rod and the key. These look like, if I needed to, I could probably take this stuff and make a pretty convincing reproduction, but I'd rather not if I don't have to. Alright, let's just pop some springs off here. These spring cradles are like really deep, a little bit harder than usual to get them off. Some horns have holes in the keys rather than cradles where they can be removed. I can't get that one. That's more normal style. And you have to remember that, or you'll put the whole stack together, which is kind of a fiddly process on some horns, and then find that you actually have to take it apart again so you can put that spring through the hole. And so there's our G sharp. One of the things I kind of like to look at is like the complexity of the G sharp key. The more complex they get, the more likely it is that that company is out of business. The G sharp on a Super 20 being like sort of the all-time craziest as far as how many pieces it has. That's somewhat thin, but thick enough. All right. This horn has single post construction, meaning that, you know, each post is all by itself. That has pluses and minuses. If it's, you know, pushed in, then it's easier to push back out, but it's easier to push in the first place. Ribbed construction is typically, it looks like that's from the other side. And look at that, that's also pretty deep in there, so I guess that's how they did it originally, was having those rods be a little bit shorter than you think you'd normally want them. But yeah, ribbed construction is harder to damage, but once it does get damaged, it's harder to fix. All right, let's see about these rollers. So there's our B flat key. Thickness of the material there. Getting really lucky with these rollers. I was expecting them all to be frozen, but it looks like just one. Boy, that is a lot of luck. Okay, so there's the B. And now let's take the lower stack off, and we've actually, I think, that's got it disassembled, except for the neck key. Oh, did I speak too soon? Yeah, look, okay. So what's happening here is I can turn the screw, but the keys are moving with it. So it's not stuck to the posts, it's stuck to a key. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this screwdriver gently, and I'm going to move the keys. Oh, and the first one I try, the F sharp is what's bound to it. Now, I bent that a little bit earlier, so I may have made that worse than it was. It seems like that moves, D moves, E moves, F moves. All right, so let's bend this back where it came from a little bit. So I'm holding on the back here. I'm going to bend this down just a little bit. And let's see if that causes it to loosen up. Not really. So I'm guessing it actually was corroded onto that key to begin with. Alright, so what I'm going to do then, first thing I do is put a little bit more penetrating oil on the offending key. And we can see how much like rust there is here. I'm betting right in here is where it's bound up. Put it on this side too, but you see the difference between like the black grime here and the rusty colored stuff here. So when we finally get this screw out, we'll probably see right down here is like a bit rusty colored. All right, so what I'm gonna do, since it's being held against this key here, and this key will stop itself on the pad, right? The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna wiggle it back and forth and see if I can start to get any movement or whether it's 100% frozen. Feels like it's 100% frozen. Yep, that's pretty direct. I mean, you guys can probably see, right? So I'm holding this in really strong. And when I press on this, you can see it starts to move the screwdriver. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is, let's see, try and get that spring out of the way a little bit. That's the one I couldn't get off. Okay, now it's coming off this time. So I'm going to heat this up a little bit. Doesn't need to be a ton, just a bit. And good thing you guys don't have smell-o-vision, because penetrating oil that's burning away like that does not smell great. But heat can help that oil penetrate a little more. And sometimes it can help the things start to get freed up, because the metal expands and contracts with heat and cold. And so if I can make them move, make the rod and the key move relative to each other with heat, I'm using the sort of properties and the strength of the metal itself to do the job for me, rather than okay, got our first little bit of movement. Okay, put a little more oil in there. So that's a really good sign. Okay, so we see I can get to like here and then go crick. And then I can come back and go crack. If this is a clock, it's going about maybe 2 hours worth. Okay, now 3. I'm not the world's strongest dude, especially after my wrist thing. My left wrist is not as strong as it used to be, but this is taking, there we go. Okay, I'm starting to move now. Fair amount of strength to do. Let's see if I can get a full turn. I can get a lot, but it seems like it doesn't want to go 360. There we go, there's our first 360. Okay. Now, one thing that's not super awesome is you can see that the head of the screw here is still not sitting proud of this post. So we might, depending on, by the time I screw this out to where the threads are out of this post over here, it's either going to be unstuck or not, right? And if I don't have a whole lot of stuff here to purchase when I'm trying to pull on it, that can be a problem. At least on this one, it looks like I've got an ability to push here. Sometimes I'll take a thick spring and hold it in there and actually like tap it. We'll see what we got to do. It's moving a little easier the farther it goes, but I can feel like a grind. There's definitely like rust in there. You can see it's still stuck on the key. Oh, there we go. All right. I have a feeling I'll be able to pull this right out. Yep, man, look at all that gunk. Yeah, so there, let's take a look at this. Just to get an idea how much garbage is on there. Let's see what the key looks like, or the rod looks like underneath. Take a little bit of naphtha and woof. Yeah, that feels pretty rough underneath. I can actually feel where the rust ate into it. And we will go ahead and clean that up and see what we got left over. Might be able to reuse it, might not. But also, like, you know, see how this portion of the screw really doesn't look too bad? If we had like one of these that was really messed up, we could just cut it down and slot it, right? So throwing away an entire rod is not usually like a smart usage of resources. I actually have, you know, a whole drawer of like old rods. They might be chewed up, they might not be correct in some way, but I can always cut them down and have like a useful part left over. So let's get these keys out of here. Here's our G sharp trill. Here's our G sharp. That leverage doesn't look amazing. We'll see how that feels once we get it actually put back together. Look how shallow that key cup is. That's interesting. I wonder if I'm just noticing that and they're all like that, or whether G sharp is particularly shallow. There's our G sharp. Ooh, look at all that gunk. Here's our G sharp trill key. F sharp, where we had the binding. Pretty basic G sharp bis adjustment arm. The F. The E. The D. And yeah, I was wrong. Just got the B and the B flat left. Okay, so let's see. Hopefully this is not stuck. Nope, coming right out. There's our B and B flat. All right, so there is the saxophone body. If we look down it, how's that look? Disassembled. We can see this crush now, right? You can actually see that it started to come unsoldered on one side and crushed down in between. Pretty good. All right, so it looks like after about 30-something minutes, the GoPro overheats. So I'll have to keep that in mind in the future and try and keep everything down to 30 minutes. Maybe set a little timer. But we'll go ahead and finish this video up, hopefully. Yay, last rod came out okay. I typically put this one in the small parts because it's different enough from everything else in there that I know exactly which one it is. And then that way I don't confuse it with the side key ones over here, side key rods over there, which typically only really fit into the horn one way. But no reason to confuse it by having the neck in there too. All right, so that is disassembly. Next we are going to take the materials, the corks and felts and pads and everything off of the keys. And then after that we'll be on to cleaning. And we'll actually get to see where we are as far as like the mechanical condition, the physical condition, and start working on getting things going back together. Hopefully you found this. Oh, just noticed a dent there. I hadn't seen that one before. And that'll be interesting to take out because these are integral. They can't unscrew them. Okay. Hopefully you found that helpful, useful, and informative. My name is Matt Storr. I repair saxophones for a living, and we just disassembled a Pure Super Artiste together. See you soon, and if you've got any questions, please put them in the comments below, and I will try to address them in the next video.